Hello, retro fans. I had, well, initially some other plans, but I'm afraid that I'm going to kind of lose the momentum, or at least lose some thoughts I had while working on the program for the giveaway winner selection. And so I had to kind of squeeze this in my schedule of next episodes, and therefore I'm going to talk about this right now. Although I still have some problems with my voice after recovering from a cold, but I hope it's going to work quite fine. And I have combined this episode with a different topic which is related to programming, and hopefully this is going to make this a little bit more interesting. And I will go and start with the additional topic first, and then I move on to talk about a little bit the basic program I have created for the winner selection. Now I'm back, and as you may have recognized, this episode is going to have some background music. I hope it's not too loud. I have set it to a very low level, but just to have some, well, music in the background, basically. So, the first topic I'd like to talk about is the development of the program I have used for the winner selection of this giveaway activity combined with this How I Work series. And perhaps you have seen the video already, and therefore you know that I have created a basic program. And for the creation of this basic program, I have used CBM Studio. And during the development of the program, I have used Wise as test port of this development environment, let's call it like this. And when I had reached a certain stage, I moved to test the program on a real C64, and I recognized that the random number generator I have used has worked differently compared to Wise. And one of the main reasons is that for the program I am using the oscillator 3 of the SID as a random number generator by setting the oscillator 3 to this white noise frequency, whatever, mode, and feeding some random numbers as base frequency, and then I'm reading back values from the SID. And obviously this is working a little bit different compared between Wise and the real SID. And during the premiere of the video, we were chatting about certain things about the program and the approach, and Michael came up with the suggestion that you can use CBM Studio and real C64 for testing and debugging your programs. And he also kind to send me a short kind of explanation description about how to set this up and how to use this. And I thought perhaps it's a good idea to test this and to introduce this in a next episode, when I'm going to talk about the basic program anyway. And therefore, big thank you to Michael that he came up with the idea and this help about how this is going to work. And the thing I'm talking about is basically, if we're going to switch to a different view, which looks indeed a bit weird. So what happened? Looks like the scaling is a little bit off, so let's get it back. And I have I've used this board for the giveaway winner selection, and as you can see, I have used Ultimate 2+ for the next step. And for this video I'm going to use the Ultimate64 because the method to connect CBM Studio to those systems is basically the very same. So, and just for the sake of comfort, I'm just using the Ultimate64. It's a more compact system right now. I just want to go and demonstrate that this is working in this combination as well. So the Ultimate 2+ has a network port here, and the Ultimate64 is connected to a network here as well, and therefore the systems are very much the same. So let's get rid of the board a little bit, and let's have a look at the setup of the Ultimate64. So let's move on to different view, and as you can see I'm always right in the middle of it. So let's perform a reset, and then hopefully we are going to see a standard basic screen. And now we can maybe switch to this view. Okay, can jump into the Ultimate menu, and as you can see my net device is connected to the network, and got an IP already, and I have used a pretty short, well, network IP address range to avoid typing, and therefore it makes it much more comfortable. And this is basically all we have to do on the Ultimate side. So we just have to connect the network cable and have to check whether we got an IP or not, and we have to keep the IP in mind. That's pretty important because we're going to use this IP within a second or so. And therefore let's switch over to my Windows screen where the CBM Studio is already running, and I just have to get my mouse and scroll through this a little bit to see whether that is working. And then we have to go to Tools, and then we have to go to Options, and there is a section called Debugger, and basically I have expected something else, so perhaps I'm in the wrong. Oh, okay, it's called Emulator Control. I'm sorry for this. And here we have to set the target, and you can use whatever target you want because you're going to set the parameters by yourself anyway. And we're going to need a program called 1541u2.exe, and I will put the link into the description section where you can find this. And this is basically a program. I think it's not from Gideon itself, but from a guy from the Firm64 who's working on the firmwares as well. I just can't remember his name, I'm sorry. So I will put this in the description section as well. And this is basically our emulator path. We set this to this program, wherever you store this program, wherever you save this. And then we need to set some emulator parameters. And here we can find this IP address we can see on the right hand side in the screen of the Ultimate64. Perhaps a little bit small, but we may remember this. And then we have to set some parameters, and then we say, okay, we want to run this program. And this description basically means run the program CBM Studio is going to create and send to this emulator file here, 1541u2.exe. And well, that's basically all we have to do. It's really as simple as it is. And now we can have a test. And if we go and press F5, for example, then program is prepared, sent to the Ultimate64, and as you can see, it starts right away, and we are in the middle of this basic program. So now we can jump out of the menu since everything is working, and I will go quickly through the main function of the program. If you haven't seen, if you haven't watched the previous videos, then perhaps it's going to be a good idea. So let's start with just a few people and name them P1, P2, P3, P4, P5. And then we can set the speed of the program. Let's go for, well, 7 or something like this. It's not the fastest, but it's not going to take too long. And as you can see, the program is playing Rock, Paper, Scissor, Lizard, Spock. And the main function is that in the first round, every player is playing against every other player. And in the second round, every player with the same score as the other player plays again against this other player. And the program is doing this as long as required until there is, well, a difference. There are no pairs left, so to say. And I have implemented some shortcuts. So if you can see if one player has won 2 times already, then the program is skipping the 3rd step. So it's basically best out of 3. And there's basically no chance to win the round if you have lost this already 2 times. And this is pretty comfortable if you play with more than, 5 players. As you may have recognized, you can set this to 20 players, and this is going to take some time. Therefore, the speed value. And what I have in mind, but not implemented yet, is to implement a one-player option so that you can play against a computer, basically. But this is not done yet, and therefore I cannot talk about this right now. And as you can see, now everything is finished. We can see the player points at the bottom of the screen. And if we're going to hit enter, we get a list who has won, who is 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and so on. And now we got a chance to play this again. And just for the sake of presentation, I'm going to set up 5 players again and set this to speed 10. And here we can see now it's running a lot faster through the progress, and this is much more comfortable if you play with more than 5 players, basically. So, and while this is running on the right hand side, let's go through the program itself. It's a pretty messy basic program, I have to admit, and basically I'm a little bit sorry for this, but I was working on the parts as they came to my mind, and then I was trying to kind of weld everything together, and I had some troubles in between, especially with this, let's say, tournament system. I was testing a lot of different systems, but none of them were working very well until I came up with the approach that I run this in 2 rounds, and I'm going to explain this a little bit in detail. So as you can see, this how is that called? Oh, I'm a little bit lost. I'm not sure how this is what's the name of this sign? So let me just quickly check this. It's very interesting that exclamation mark. Okay, that's pretty simple. And well, you can go through all that stuff, and that's always something I miss. But basically, you can use this exclamation mark to add comments to your programs, or basically to the CBM section of your program. And these comments are, basically are stripped from the code when you go to the basic program. So if we say no and we make a list, then you can see all those additional comments are missing, except for this standard rem command, which I have left in the code, because if I am working on the C64 itself, it's sometimes a little bit easier to find certain parts of the programs program if you have some RAM sections in it. And basically, as you can see, at the beginning I'm going to clear the screen, set the colors, then I define some arrays which I need for storing the names, storing the points, and doing the sorting at the end. And then I have to define some sprites, and I'm using this standard data read format to get the data from it. And as you can see on the left hand side, I have used the built-in sprite editor of the CBM Studio to create the different sprites, and then you can simply export the values to your basic program. This is very comfortable, and this is what I'm doing here at the beginning, and therefore it takes a little moment until the program is really ready to go. And I create an additional sprite which is basically empty, and I use this when I don't want to show any sprite on the screen at all. And then I just set those two variables to 0 for the function of playing again. I have to reset some variables, and therefore I had to add this line. And then basically it's straightforward, how many players, checking if the input is correct, and then setting the player scores to 0. This is in case you play again, then we have to reset all the player scores. And then we have to input the player names. Yes, indeed. So we have to go through this. And here I'm doing some check whether the name is too long. Otherwise it wouldn't fit into the player screen later on. And therefore I just reduce this to a certain length. And then here we can enter the speed. It's a number between 1 and 10. And this variable is used later on in a for next command to slow down the progress a little bit. And then I'm doing some initial placement of the sprites. So basically I'm using 6 sprites for the different rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock figures, signs, whatever we want to call this. And a 7th sprite for the count. And the count sprite is doubled in size, so in both dimensions. And basically, then we are already starting with the first round. And as you can see, I'm using some simple for next loops to go through the player. So the player 1 is playing against player 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, depending on how many players we have. And then it steps 1 step forward, and player 2 is playing against player 3, 4, 5, and so on. Basically very simple. And as soon as we have done this, we have to go to the next round. But before I'm going to explain this, let's move on to the battle itself to make this a little bit more structured. And here we can see I'm using a sub-program to place the print output on the screen. So here I'm just setting the position to show player 1 and show player 2. And this is just used if the player name is longer, or this is basically, no, that's the score. And I had a problem that if the score jumps over 10, or no, the player number, that's the player number, I'm sorry. If the player number is bigger than 1 digit and jumps back to 1 digit, then the second digit will remain on the screen. Therefore I had to delete this first before I print the next digit or the next number, player number on the screen. This is basically the top section of the player screen. So let's just start the program again. This is the creation of the sprites, basically what I have said. And then let's just make 3 players. Doesn't play any big role, and then set the speed to 1. And here you can see on the third line, or basically the second line, player number 1, player number 2. And if this is bigger than 1 digit, then I had the issue that the the print command wasn't overriding the second digit, and therefore I had to delete this. And then I reset the round counter. This is important because I have to check whether we had some winners or not. This is in case that both player having the same, well, ID or same sign, whatever we want to call this. And I really have to check whether there was some progress or not. And then I set the sprites depending on the random number, and the random number is generated in the subprogram positioned at 3100. And then let's move on to 3100. There I can show you how I have done this. So basically I'm using the standard random number generator to generate the frequency for the oscillator 3, and I'm using the built-in timer to create a different, let's say, initializing point, whatever. And then I write those numbers to the SID itself, as you can see with the poke command. And then I have to set some other parameters for the oscillator 3 so that we really have some sound. And if you set this number to something else than 0, we would even hear the sound, and we would hear the differences for every round, so to say. And then here I'm reading back the value from the oscillator 3, and since I'm using this white noise frequency, I'm getting very different numbers every time I'm looking at this memory address, and therefore we got a much more, let's say, randomized value compared to standard random functions of BASIC. I'm not 100% sure whether this is really making things a lot better than using some combinations of random commands, but I was really interested in to test this function, and interestingly other people were using this function as well, so it was quite easy to find, let's say, the related procedure and to implement this. So, and the cursor placement for the print command is basically just setting those poke addresses and then running this subroutine, which is kind of built in the C64 already. And then we jump back, and then we have basically our different numbers. And depending on the number, I'm setting the sprite base address to the memory range where we can find the related sprite. So basically the sprite remains the very same at the very same position, just gets some different, well, content basically. And then I'm doing some checking whether they are different, and if so, I'm using this lap counter I have talked about at the beginning. And then I'm checking who has won this round, and depending on this I increase the player score, and then I have to write back the player score into the array of the related player, so that we can have a player score at the end of this program. And this is done in this section, basically not so complicated. And then I have to empty the sprites for the next round, print the current standings. This is what happens on basically the bottom of the screen, just above this press any key to continue line, this 0 to 1. And this is basically split into 2 lines if we have more than 10 players, otherwise it would run out of the screen. And then if we are in the first stint, or the first round, whatever we want to call this, I'm using this next command, jumping back to this for next we have created somewhere here at the beginning. I can't even find it. I was in the wrong section. Going through the players, here we have 401, 402, and this is the related next command for this. And then when we have finished this round, I have to check whether we have some pairs. And the plan was for the giveaway activity to have really distinguished distinguished ranking. So I don't want to end up with two first places and two second places and so on. And therefore I've implemented something to check whether two players have the same score, then they play again. And then I'm checking again if there are two players with the same score, then they play again, and so on. And I start with the highest number, and then I work myself down to the bottom of this whole ranking system. And at the end of the day, I should end up with a list of different scores for each player. And well, as you may imagine, that with up to 20 players, this can take quite a while, since every time we find, for example, two players with the score of 3, then they play against each other, then one player is ending up with a score of 4, then there's perhaps another player with a score of 4, then they play against each other, and so on, until we have reached the highest score of this whole game. And this may take some time, and therefore I have added this speed function. So, and if this is done, we jump to the end of the program, create final standings. So basically I clear the screen, print the end, then I go through this whole list of scores, checking what's going to be the high score, and then I start sorting this list, starting from the highest value down to the lowest value. And the interesting thing is that as long as I was playing this on the Wise emulator, I never had the case that there was a gap in the score. So if you have, for example, 5 players, then usually the program was ending up with 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 as a scoring, for example. But every now and then I ended up with a scoring like 6, 5, 4, 3, 1, 0, for example. And my sorting procedure wasn't working, and therefore I had to implement some test functions. That's the reason for this comment here, print gap. I had to detect whether there is a gap between two players, and then I had to go through the list again to finish the standings. And then, well, I'm just going to present the final list of the participants or the players, and then I'm just asking whether we want to play it again or not. So, and this is basically the main function of this whole program, which is not so complicated at all, I think. And let me find some screen that's working. It's really strange that all of my desk cams are too small today. Well, that's something I really have to check. I did an update on OBS quite recently, but I checked whether all my scenes are working because I run into this program already and this problem already. But well, perhaps I was not checking all of the scenes, and well, so much about preparation. Anyway, yes, so this is basically a very quick run through the main idea, the main concept of this pretty messy basic program. And as I have announced in the giveaway video, I'm going to make this video available. I'm going to make this program available, and I have to check whether I put this on Github, for example, or on a Google page or something like this. I'm not even sure. I'm not so familiar with GitHub because that's not basically my main business to upload things like this. But since I want to make other things I'm working on available as well, perhaps I really have to spend some time on checking how GitHub is working, and then I will put all that stuff onto probably GitHub, well, to make it short. And I will talk about this in the next video or something like this. I'm not sure whether I'm able to get this done in the range of this video, but that's basically the main idea, and I'm really looking forward to comments and ideas about this basic program. I'm 100% sure there is a lot of stuff that can be programmed in a much more efficient way, and basically this is well, my first basic program on Commodore 64 in basic version 2 for about, let's say, 20 years or something like this. And even back in the past, I have mostly worked with basic extensions, so it was really a little bit well, cumbersome at the beginning to start with this basic V2, because it really lacks a lot of essential commands I'm used to have from other basic systems. And well, but last but not least, I'm pretty happy that I came out with the result like this. One thing I forgot to mention, so let's quickly move over to this view again, is the playing screen we can see right now. I have used the screen design of the CBM Studio as well. Here you can draw your screen basically using different characters and different Petsky signs, characters, and this can be exported to BASIC as well. And this is basically what happens at the end of this program. I just had to cut one line of it because otherwise the screen was scrolling, and fortunately I had enough space so I could afford just missing one line here. And yeah, this is a very, very comfortable way to work with this CBM Studio, and especially combined with the Ultimate64 or a, let's say, standard. Once again, really strange. Or with a standard C64 and a Ultimate 2 Plus. And I was really surprised that it is that easy. I haven't expected this. And what I've seen so far, and not covered yet because that's basically not my main business, so to say. If you do this with assembler programming, then you have even more functions for debugging and all that things. And you can use the pretty same procedure. You can code on your CBM Studio and then you send it to the C64 for testing, and this makes it very, very comfortable to work with. One thing I really had that was a little bit challenging me. You may have recognized, I was talking in one episode about this. I'm using an Amiga 600 keyboard with the Kira V2 as an USB converter on my PC as a main keyboard. And I was programming on CBM Studio on Windows, and then I was moving to the C64 for testing, and the two keyboards, they have basically a very similar layout, but in detail they are different, and I was really having a hard time finding the right keys depending on which system I was working. So this was pretty much a challenge when I started to work on the real C64 for testing. And yeah, but that's just some funny episode or, well, story around this whole system. So yeah, basically that's I think all for this episode. That's already long enough I think. And perhaps just some last comment on this channel monetizing, channel membership thingy I have released just some days ago. And I have received a lot of feedback, and thank you very much to all people who had sent me thoughts and comments, and I really appreciate this. And the interesting thing is that they came up with some thoughts or some concerns I haven't had in mind so far, and that's very interesting. And basically what I have decided yet, that's not carved in stone, but basically what I have decided for the moment is that I will go on and test this channel membership, because this is not going to affect anything at all. This is just something in addition to this whole episode style YouTube channel concept I'm having right now. But I'm not going to monetize the channel in a way that we're going to have advertisings at the beginning, in the middle, or something like this. So I have checked some of other retro-related channels, and I think having advertisement is pretty annoying, at least for me. It really sucks, to make it short. There are some channels where you can skip the advertising. This is quite okay, but there are others where you can't. And the major concern I have is that you have basically no control over the content. So sometimes there's some advertising where I really ask myself, what's going to be the purpose? Is this related to what I'm going to watch in hopefully some minutes or something like this? And I really want to avoid this, and therefore no monetizing for this channel so far yet. I hope YouTube is not going to force me to do so, depending on this new, well, I don't know, rules they have set up. But as I said, I'm going to test this channel membership thingy because I think it's going to be, well, an interesting and perhaps funny part, especially when I will be able to stream live again. I have some issues with my internet service provider right now, so this is not working very reliable. And you may have seen some broken videos on my channel, and this is kind of related to this issue. So if there's some interruption in the upload, then YouTube may screw up some of your videos or something like this. And I haven't recognized this at the beginning. I got a pretty bad comment on one video, but so I'm sorry for the troubles. But the channel membership is pretty interesting because you get a chance to support my channel directly over YouTube. The terms of conditions are not that much better compared to Patreon, but the interesting thing is that getting the money from Patreon transferred to Germany is a pretty awful procedure, and even Patreon is well, taking a big piece of the pie for itself, and I do not see that much service from Patreon. So therefore I think if YouTube is getting a part of the money, then this is perhaps the better deal, because YouTube is at least interested in to kind of promote the videos over search and, well, what's hot and all that functions they're going to use. And the interesting thing is basically that it makes things easier for me. So I do not have to work on different platforms. I do not have to maintain different communication platforms. I really want to reduce this to basically two main systems, going to be YouTube and going to be Twitter. And basically over the next weeks or months, I'm not sure about this, I want to abandon this whole Patreon idea. The thing is, basically what keeps me on Patreon is that I support others, like Steve from the Pi 1541, like Protovision, and like OBS, the OBS project, for example. And all my supporters who have spent money to this well, project over Patreon, this money is used for supporting others. So I never transferred any money to my bank account or something like this. So this is really something I give away straight, and hopefully this is the most beneficial thing for others, so there are not that much losses, hopefully. I'm not sure. And I have to check how this is going to work with YouTube at the end of the day, so I'm not really sure if money-wise this makes that much sense, but the thing is that we can get more, let's say, influence, more contact over this YouTube channel membership. I have prepared a couple of different perks. You can check, there's an explanation video and some introduction video about this whole thing, so that you can see what I have in mind. And I set this to the very lowest value possible so far, and we can, well, work on this, adapt this in a way whatever fits to your interests. And basically it's really not about the money, so I'm not going to earn money in a big style with this channel, not within the next months or years probably. So this whole thing is still related to my main job, so my day-to-day business, and that's basically just a hobby I'm going to make available for others, hopefully. So anyway, enough chatting about this topic. I hope this video was kind of interesting, and if you have any questions and if you want to see some other stuff related to, well, development, C64, connections, thingy, something like this, then feel free to express this in the comment section. I'm looking forward, and well, yeah, as I said, I'm going to work on different topics within the next weeks, more tech related stuff, and hopefully this is going to be a bit more interesting than this kind of long how I work, well, series. Anyway, thanks for watching, and well, see you for the next video. Bye bye.